all of my atheist friends consistently attach meaning to their lives.
Well, what is it that gives a life meaning? I'm curious.
Purpose. There is a purpose to my life, and there's a value to my life. But when you read some of the philosophers who are brutally honest, you begin to realize, wait a second. To argue for human worth in light of the fact that we're all cosmic accidents is to jump into la-la land. You don't have worth. You're an accident. And to attach worth to yourself is just an egotistical trip. You don't have any more worth than the leaf, the tree.
So if two people had, say, an unplanned pregnancy and they ended up having that child, by nature of being an accident, that child would be worthless?
No. Human life is a precious gift from God. Every human being, I don't care if you're in a wheelchair, I don't care if you're mentally challenged, we all have innate worth because we're human beings created in the image of God. And He created us for a purpose, and that purpose is to love and worship Him and to love and serve each other. That's the basis for human dignity. You take God up out of the picture, and you're up a creek without a paddle when it comes to explaining why. Why is a human being valuable?
Because I'm here.
Because I'm here. Well, guess what? So is this bug. What's the difference between stepping on the bug, stepping on you? Is there a difference?
I don't think there's much of a difference, except for the fact that you and I are of the same species, obviously, and we're considered to be higher level organisms than a beetle or a bug because we have advanced mental processes and, cognitive abilities that are not available to pretty much every other member of the animal kingdom. I think that's how you could argue that we have greater value, not that we're any more valuable just because, we're one thing and a beetle is a different thing, and we're made in the image of God. I think the only reason that we could argue that we are more valuable than any other animal is because we're more intelligent.
Okay. So listen to what you just said. The only reason we're valuable than a beetle is because we're more intelligent.
I think you could make that argument that those people, I don't believe this, but I think you could make that argument that those people are not valuable. And I think a lot of people do believe that. I don't personally believe that because, I personally believe that pretty much every life is sacred, whether it be the life of, a beetle, an ant, or a person, just because it's alive and I don't think you should be, out to harm the things around you.
But why?
But I honestly, I think at the end of the day, whether or not my life has value or not, according to you or me or anybody else here, doesn't really matter. It's not going to change the fact that I'm going to wake up tomorrow and I'm still going to go to class and come home and, try and succeed and live a good life. What does it matter?
What does it matter? Yeah. I'll tell you what it matters. Thank you. I'm stealing this. Right? Because I want it. I'll tell you what does she have worth or does she not? If she has worth, then it is evil for me to steal what belongs to her. It's disrespectful. I'll tell you why it matters. Because there's such a thing called racism. And so you've got to figure out, wait a second, is racism acceptable or not? If it's not acceptable, why? If it is acceptable, why? I'll tell you why it matters. Because you have to choose.
Well, I think racism is not, not acceptable because it's not acceptable to discriminate against someone who has the same mental capacity as you do. They just have a different skin color. That's you talked about the innate moral conscience that we're all granted with. Obviously, that goes against any logical person's moral conscience. To discriminate against something else because of something that they can't help and something that is so insignificant in terms of how similar you actually are to that person.
Sir, some of the most intelligent people of the 20th century supported Hitler's eugenics program. They were the ones doing it. They were the most rational, intelligent people of their day, and that's the 20th century we're talking about.
Who were being threatened by the Nazis?
You got to be kidding. You think all those people who performed eugenics for Hitler were just doing it because fear of Hitler?
Not all of them, but I think a great number of them.
Yeah, some of them were motivated by fear, you bet. And then some of them, like the German pastor Dietrich Bonhoeffer, had the courage to try and assassinate Hitler because of the amount of atrocities he was perpetrating on human beings. But you see, the question becomes, if your worldview is right, that our value is based on our intelligence. That's what eugenics in Nazi Germany was all about. Promote intelligent human life, and less intelligent human life, wipe out or discard.
Based on incorrect criteria. The Nazis thought that someone who has blonde hair and blue eyes was innately more intelligent than someone who had brown hair and brown eyes, and that's stupid. That's factually incorrect.
Human value has nothing to do with IQ, and it has nothing to do with PhDs or advanced degrees.
Well, don't you think that value is a contextual issue? Well, what did you say your brother did again?
He transplants kidneys and liver.
So if we were on a deserted island and someone needed to have, let's say we had the equipment to have a kidney transplant, your sister is of the same value as your brother, but because your brother has that expertise, he would be more valuable in that scenario because he would be able to successfully do a kidney transplant.
Well, what I would put that is, if I need a kidney transplant, I'm not going to turn to my sister. I'm going to turn to my brother. No offense to you. If I need a kidney transplant, I ain't turning to you. I'm turning to my brother, who's a transplant surgeon, okay? All right, but that has nothing to do with innate human value. Innate human value is a separate issue of, is a person in themselves valuable, or is their value determined by their IQ, their grad school degrees, or the size of their stock portfolio or a bank account? And you and I live in a culture that tends towards your value depends upon the size of your stock portfolio and bank account. And that is tragic.
I would agree.
But it's a decision that we make as a result of our worldview, our view of human worth. Why is a human being valuable? So you see how relevant this whole issue of God and Jesus is. It's so relevant because it answers the issue of human worth, purpose in life, morality, and life after death. Friends, those are the most important issues.
So I guess I just have one last question, and then I have to go. But so if you were given, I'm just curious, if you were given some piece of certifiable proof that there is no God, something that's completely indisputable, would you change your mind? Would you try and find a way around that? Just because one piece of information that I think is interesting is especially with a lot of cults, people who believe like, oh, the world is going to end in 2012, things like that. One thing that I think is funny that never happens when the world actually doesn't end in 2012 is these people never go like, oh, I guess we were just wrong. They either go, oh, we must have misinterpreted it, or maybe we did something to upset God or something, but they never just say, damn, man, maybe we were just wrong, And I
Great
think
point.
It gets so ingrained into people's heads that it's impossible for them to change their worldview to a certain extent.
And that is why I so love 1 Corinthians 15. Because in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, Paul opens up the door and says, here is a way to falsify faith in Christ. I love it.
And what is that?
He says, if Jesus Christ is not risen from the dead, our faith is futile. It's a waste of time. It's wrong. Ooh, that was a big mistake, Paul, because now you've given us a way to verify or to falsify Jesus Christ. I love it. This whole idea of, why do you believe in Jesus? Because I believe, is idiocy. Idiocy. You don't believe something simply because you choose to. But you watch out. You watch on this campus, which is a very good institution of higher learning, how many students and professors say, I believe because I believe. That is taught here. I've had people come up to me and debate that with me. It's scary, friend.
I agree.
All right. So Paul in 1 Corinthians 15 points out, if Jesus Christ is not risen from the dead, you're a pack of fools for believing in him. Good point, Paul. So yes, all you need to do to show me that my faith is idiocy, is bankrupt, is to show me the evidence that Jesus Christ did not rise from the dead.
Which no one can do because he lived 2,000 years ago.
That's not true at all. All you've got to do is find the evidence that he didn't rise. The evidence is overwhelming that he did rise. He was buried in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, not a secret place. He really died. The Gospel of John records how a Roman soldier stuck a spear in his side and warrior's serum separate from clotted blood flowed from his side, medical sign of death.
Right.
They bury him in the tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. His disciples are not true believers. They're not the blind type of folks that you and I don't appreciate. They were all Christ deniers, Christ betrayers, Christ deserters. They all deserted him in the Garden of Gethsemane. Peter, his bravest follower, denied knowing him 3 times. Judas Iscariot, one of his 12 closest followers, quote unquote, betrayed him for 30 pieces of silver. These are not blind believers. These are skeptics. All of them are skeptics.
Who choose, wait, so then you're saying then that they chose to ultimately believe in Christ based on the fact that he was in fact resurrected. Not, and we talked about earlier that, that it's incorrect to believe whether or not God is real or is not real based on a miracle. Like the Israelites who didn't believe in God and, fell away based off the splitting of the Red Sea and the rock gushing, or the water gushing from the rock, and all that stuff. So how is that any different from the disciples being skeptical when Jesus fed 5,000 and walked on water and all that, but then when he was resurrected from the dead, that was the defining moment that they said, okay, this guy's legit. We should probably start believing in him fully.
Well, it's not quite fair to say they didn't believe before the resurrection, because in Matthew chapter 16, when Jesus asked, who do you say I am? Peter says, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God.
And then he denied him 3 times.
Exactly. So he's obviously struggling with doubt. He's an honest skeptic. He believes at times, and at other times he finds his faith faltering. Sounds a lot like me. At times I really believe, and other times I have doubt and I falter. But the resurrection of Christ led to Jesus' younger brother James, who did not believe that his older brother was Christ. I mean, it was the Son of God. Imagining believing that your older brother was the Son of God, what that would take. Well, James did not believe in Christ until after the resurrection. When Jesus had risen from the dead, James says, wow. And he becomes a leader of the first century church. So there's tons of historical evidence that Jesus really rose from the dead. A few thousand Jews who worshipped on Sabbath, the last day of the week, Saturday, all of a sudden contradict their culture, their religion, and they start worshiping on Sunday. In celebration of what? In celebration of the resurrection.
But if this evidence truly was as solid as you're proposing, why is not everyone a believer? I mean, because you can always say that, well, those people who wrote the Bible lied, well, they were incorrect, well, they were mistaken. How solid really is that evidence? If you didn't live there and see it with your own eyes and, actually watch it happen, how can you take the word of those men over, my word when saying that, that Jesus Christ wasn't the Son of God? Like, what makes them so credible?
Eyewitness testimony can get you and me thrown into jail. Eyewitness testimony can get you and me into the electric chair. It can get us executed.
Well, have you ever played telephone? I mean, that's eyewitness testimony right now. These are events that happened 2,000 years ago and have been translated into over 30 languages, right? I mean, how often do you think that has changed from what they originally wrote down?
Great point. But the New Testament that we have in English today has nothing to do with all these many translations. We go right back to the Greek manuscripts to translate into English. So we don't go through French and Spanish and Armenian.
Aren't there differences in the Greek language and the English language, just as there are differences in the English language and every other language? Aren't there phrases that appear in Greek that can't be properly translated into English and things like that? I just feel like it would be such a meticulous and careful task having to translate it. Don't you find it at least a little bit hard to believe that they could translate everything completely perfectly from a completely different language 2,000 years ago?
I think that is part of your culture when you talk about perfect translation.
Well, what is my culture?
Your culture is computers, the internet. Your culture is a degree of precision in the area of mathematics and science that is totally unrealistic when it comes to historical knowledge. I can know something historically, not because I have a minute-by-minute, second-by-second account of exactly what happened, but I can know generally what happened. The guy at UCLA who debated with me that the Holocaust never took place
It's exactly
ridiculous.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's exactly my point. And yet there are people who use shreds of evidence to try and say that the Holocaust didn't exist, or that 9/11 was caused by the government, or all these crazy things. And
Right.
and there's pieces of evidence that they can point to. How is what you're proposing any different from those people who we both agree, I'm sure, are whack jobs?
You bet. Because when you read Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Peter, James, after you read those documents, to walk away saying they're whack jobs is really weak.
Also, didn't all of these guys live at the same time and know each other? Do you think it's very far-fetched that they could have collaborated on their works at all? Or
Oh, undoubtedly they collaborated. They talked with each other. They had relationships. Paul gets a lot of his information from Peter and James and the other apostles. So they obviously had friendships. They collaborated. They talked. But these guys stood before Roman soldiers, and the Roman soldiers said, say Caesar is Lord. If you say Caesar is Lord, you live. But if you maintain that your Jesus is Lord, we'll kill you for it. And every single one of them said,
no, thank you.
I'm sorry, I've seen Jesus risen from the dead. He is Lord, and they died. Not for a belief. They died for what they claimed to have seen. The dead Christ risen from the dead.
Yeah. So don't you think that they said, no, that's not how it happened. Like, you got this wrong. And I mean, obviously, if they're living at the same time and writing what's basically the same story, that they're going to be fact-checking with each other. And it's not... It's almost like four guys writing the same book together. Like, don't you think? How could... I just don't think it's that much different from just one guy writing the book.
Okay. First point is, there are some significant differences in the different letters. That's why so many people say to me, they contradict each other. No, they don't contradict each other, but they definitely give different perspectives.
I agree.
So, they're not carbon copies. Second point, one of the reasons that those Gospels and New Testament letters demand so much respect is because of their brutal honesty about their mistakes. For instance, Peter, he acknowledges that Jesus is the Christ. A few verses later, Jesus has to say to him, "Get behind me, Satan. You do not have in mind the things of God, but the things of man." Imagine a group of guys getting together and creating this fictitious teaching of Jesus, do not lust. Give me a break. I don't think a bunch of guys are going to get together and say, hey, let's dream up a teaching and try and persuade people that this teaching is credible. Guess what, guys? You're not to lust after women. No. Not the way to win a bunch of guys' allegiance, right? Also, Jesus crying out on the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Is that something you want to make up in order to convince people that Jesus is really God in human form? Questioning his own identity? I doubt it. So you see, when you read those Gospels and when you read the New Testament honestly, it's amazing how vulnerable they are in putting the truth forth plainly. Not in this watertight compartment. There are problems. There are challenges. But I like that. That has the ring of credibility to me. If it's all whitewashed, I'm not impressed.
But at the end of the day, how can you actually know that what they wrote down was true, or whether or not it was just a lie for some ends that we may not know?
You bet. Well, it's the same way I read any document. I first of all look at the literary style. Is it mythology? Is it once upon a time in the land of Nod, Wynken, Blynken, and Odd took a boat ride? Or is it at this time, in this place, with these people around, Jesus said this and did that? Obviously, the Gospels are not mythology, they're historical narrative. Then, what about contradictions? Do they contradict each other? No, there's a tremendous internal consistency. Then what about archaeology? Did Jesus float a boat and float it to the island of Atlantis? No. Sea of Galilee, Jerusalem, Bethlehem, Nazareth, archaeologically verifiable places. Well, I'll put the Quran through that. I'll put any historical document through that. And then you raise the telephone game issue, which is a great issue. How do we know that the Gospels haven't just been perverted over the past 2,000 years? Well, we know that because today we have over 5,200 Greek manuscripts or pieces of manuscript that the New Testament's based on, all agreeing to an infinitesimal degree. dated from the 2nd through the 10th century AD.
It's a pretty big gap, don't you think?
What?
2nd to the 10th century? 800 years?
Yeah. But the manuscripts in the 10th century agree with the manuscripts from the 2nd century.
Just as our manuscripts today are supposed to agree with those manuscripts, don't you think?
Yeah, but if there's a problem, then we got a problem. But if there's consistency, then that demands respect and heightens credibility.
Well, don't you think that consistency could have just possibly come from reading the earlier documents and then reproducing those in the same fashion?
Sure, it could have come about that way. But then the question is, what does the evidence point to? And the evidence is that those Gospels in the 2nd century, 3rd century, 4th century, in Greek, are totally consistent. Are there mistakes? Yes, a plethora of mistakes. As Bart Ehrman from Chapel Hill likes to point out, there are about 200 to 400,000 manuscript variants in the 25,000 manuscripts that we have back from the first 10 centuries.
Isn't that problematic?
Well, Bart Ehrman's a rascal because in his footnotes, he points out that those 200 to 400,000 manuscript variants are found in 25,000 manuscripts. So that means how many mistakes are there for each manuscript? If you got 25,000 manuscripts and there are 200 to 400,000 variants, then you've got 8 to 16 variants per manuscript. That's stinking incredible.